The unexpected arrival. The galactic classroom hummed with the low, electric buzz of thousands of minds thinking, calculating, and creating in unison. Students sat before their sleek, glowing consoles, their fingers dancing over holographic interfaces. The classroom, part of the prestigious Galactic Academy, was suspended high above the massive rings of Indris 9, a gas giant whose swirling clouds of gas and dust seemed to stretch endlessly into the abyss. The rings of Indris 9 cast an eerie light over the space station's vast observation windows, which were filled with the shimmering colors of distant nebula and the ever-expanding universe beyond. This was no ordinary institution of learning. The Galactic Academy was a revered beacon of knowledge, gathering the best and brightest minds from across the universe. It was a place where alien species, each more unique and fascinating than the last, came to push the boundaries of science, philosophy, and exploration. Humanoids, insectoids, energy beings, and entities that defied description all sat together, learning from one another, sharing knowledge and wisdom that spanned millennia. It was a place where the mysteries of existence were unraveled piece by piece. But on this particular day, there was a noticeable shift in the classroom's atmosphere. The students were distracted, their attention no longer fully focused on their studies. Whispers buzzed through the air, traveling across the classroom as rumors spread like wildfire. Today, a new student had arrived, a student unlike any other. Aurora Venn sat in the farthest corner of the room, her head lowered slightly as she stared at the desk before her. She wasn't here by choice. In fact, if it were up to her, she would have preferred to be anywhere else but here, in the midst of a galaxy-renowned institution where she didn't belong. But the Council of Worlds had decided otherwise. They had sent her here, and now she was expected to prove herself among beings that had evolved far beyond anything humans could imagine. She was young, only 16 years old, and human, which in itself was already enough to make her an anomaly in a place like this. Humans were a relatively new addition to the interstellar community, their influence on galactic affairs still in its infancy. The alien species that filled the halls of the Galactic Academy were centuries, if not millennia, ahead of humans in terms of scientific knowledge, technological advancement, and intergalactic travel. Yet, despite these glaring differences, the Council of Worlds had seen something in Aurora, something unique that could bridge the gaps between species, something that could offer new perspectives. Aurora's suit, a worn and patched orange and gray ensemble, was a stark contrast to the sleek, uniform attire worn by most of the students here. The mismatched patches on her suit told stories of a life spent in survival, of countless repairs and modifications as she made her way through a war-torn galaxy. The scars and imperfections of her suit were evidence of battles fought, not just in space, but within her own soul. She was no stranger to adversity. Raised on Earth, she had grown up during a time of great unrest, watching as her world was torn apart by conflicts beyond anyone's control. Her reputation had spread throughout the galaxy, though many of the details were distorted, exaggerated, or completely misunderstood. Some said she had cracked the symmetric equation, a mathematical breakthrough that had eluded even the brightest minds of the Academy. Others whispered that she had outsmarted a fleet of warships, defeating enemies who had more advanced technology than any human could ever hope to possess. But for Aurora, none of this mattered. The truth was simple. She was just good at seeing patterns. It wasn't magic. It wasn't genius. It was survival. The students around her continued to whisper, their voices cutting through the room like a swarm of angry bees. Is that her? The human they're raving about? One voice said, its tone tinged with disbelief. She looks so small. Another voice, one that was colder and more dismissive, chimed in. What could she possibly teach us? She's just a child. Aurora could hear every word, her translator chip automatically filtering and decoding the alien languages into something comprehensible. It wasn't the first time she had been the subject of such scrutiny, but it still stung. She wasn't some curiosity, some experiment to be marveled at. She was here because the Council of Worlds had demanded it. and she would not let their faith in her be misplaced. As she sat there, trying to tune out the whispers and focus on the task at hand, a figure emerged from the crowd of students. A large reptilian creature with shimmering bioluminescent patches along its long neck and shoulders. The Zarian, a species known for their intelligence and disdain for anything they deemed beneath them, strode forward with an air of confidence. Their sharp, elongated features glinted in the soft light of the room, and as they spoke, their voice hissed like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "This is a joke," the Zarian said, their voice cutting through the room with biting sarcasm. "We come here to transcend ignorance, to unlock the secrets of existence itself, and we are to be taught by a mere child." The room fell into a hush, all eyes turning toward Aurora. The Zarian's words echoed in the silence, challenging her very presence. Aurora's gloved hand moved to her face, her fingers pinching the bridge of her nose as she took a slow breath. She had heard this before, countless times. People who doubted her, who saw her as insignificant, as nothing more than a fleeting curiosity. But they were wrong. And now, she would make them see why. She looked up slowly, meeting the Zarian's glowing eyes with an unflinching stare. The silence in the room was palpable, thick with tension. Aurora's voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. "I'm not here to teach you," she said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm here to make you think. If you can't manage that, you might want to check if your oversized brain is still functioning." The Zarian's bioluminescent patches flickered, a sign of embarrassment and humiliation. The room was still, save for a few quiet snickers from the other students. Aurora didn't look away. She held the Zarian's gaze, refusing to back down. The challenge had been issued. Now it was time to show them all what humanity was truly capable of. Before anyone could respond, the room's AI system chimed in, its synthetic voice filling the space. "Attention, class. Today's lesson will be a live simulation. All students are required to interface with the shared neural network." The consoles around the room lit up, soft humming sounds emanating from each one as the students prepared for the simulation. Chairs shifted and adjusted, accommodating the various anatomies of the different species present. But Aurora's console remained dark, unlit. She didn't need it. She had learned to survive in environments far more hostile than this, and the simulation would be no different. The viewport darkened, and the room began to transform. The classroom disappeared, replaced by an endless void. Nebulae swirled in the distance, their gaseous tendrils stretching across the simulation's vast expanse. The hum of the neural network's connection reverberated through the room, and the students' minds connected to the simulation's shared reality. For Aurora, this was just another challenge, another test of her survival instinct. The galaxy had always been unpredictable, and now it was time to see how she would navigate this new realm. The real lesson was just beginning. Into the simulation. As the simulated environment took shape around them, the students found themselves standing in the midst of a vast, infinite void. The stars scattered across the dark expanse flickered like distant diamonds, and gaseous nebulae swirled in intricate cosmic patterns. The air was not real, but it felt real enough, just cool enough to bring a shiver to the spine. Aurora Venn was no stranger to simulations. She had faced them countless times throughout her journey. But this one, unlike the others, felt different. It was as if the simulation itself was watching them, waiting for them to make the first move. Her mind was already linked to the neural network, her thoughts synchronized with the shared consciousness of the other students. Their presence was felt as a faint hum in the back of her mind, like an undercurrent flowing beneath the surface of her own thoughts. She could sense their curiosity, their skepticism, their impatience. Aurora closed her eyes briefly, letting the connection settle into place. She didn't need to see to understand the world around her. The simulation was more than just a visual display. It was a test of perception, of problem solving, of strategy, and she would need every ounce of her experience to succeed. "Welcome, students," the voice of the simulation's eye echoed in their minds, crisp and clear. Your challenge is to navigate this environment and achieve a specific objective. You will need to collaborate, adapt, and think critically. Failure to work together will result in consequences. A ripple of unease ran through the students as the AI's words sank in. The room, if it could even be called a room, seemed to contract, and a sudden surge of pressure filled the atmosphere. It wasn't physical, but it was tangible. They were being thrust into the unknown, and their success or failure was now entirely in their hands. The simulation's objective was unclear, but Aurora had learned one important thing over the years. In every situation, there were patterns, and those patterns could be used to predict outcomes. The key to survival was understanding how things worked before they unfolded. That was the strength of human ingenuity, seeing the possibilities where others saw only chaos. As she stood there, feeling the hum of the collective minds around her, Aurora began to analyze the environment. She focused on the stars, their positions, the movement of the nebulae. Slowly, the data started to form a coherent picture. Something in the vastness of the simulation had a rhythm, a logic. The space around them wasn't as random as it seemed. It was all connected by an invisible thread, a web of gravitational forces, energy currents, and subtle patterns that only someone with a keen mind could decipher. Beside her, a large insectoid being, the thorax, shifted its position. The thorax, with its multiple eyes and spindly legs, seemed to be in constant motion, scanning the environment, assessing the situation. Its mandibles clicked nervously, a sign of anxiety. The thorax had a reputation for intelligence, but unlike the humanoid species in the academy, it was more instinctual than rational. It relied on its natural senses and reflexes, unable to see the deeper patterns that others might detect. "We need to find the core," the thorax murmured, its voice an eerie, clicking sound that reverberated in Aurora's mind. The center of this simulation. Aurora turned to face it, her eyes narrowed in thought. The thorax was right. They needed to find the center, but there was more to this than just locating a physical space. The simulation wasn't just about movement through space. It was about movement through ideas, through concepts, through the very nature of what they understood reality to be. In this strange world, nothing was as it seemed. "The core isn't just a location," Aurora said, her voice soft but firm. "It's an idea, a concept. We have to understand how this environment works before we can find the center." The thorax's antennae twitched in confusion, its mind still processing her words. "What do you mean? We should move." "No," Aurora interrupted. "Stay still. Focus. Observe. There's a pattern here." She gestured toward the swirling nebulae, the stars, the gravitational anomalies that flickered in and out of view. "Everything in this simulation is connected. We just need to figure out how." The other students, at least the ones who were paying attention, began to listen. A few murmured, but most were still distracted by the sheer vastness of the environment, unsure of how to begin. In a place where the boundaries between real and unreal blurred, it was easy to become disoriented. But Aurora had learned that in such moments of uncertainty, it was important to rely on one's instincts, and her instincts told her that the simulation was just a reflection of something much deeper, a mirror of the cosmic forces that govern the universe. She began to focus on the gravitational anomalies, the tiny distortions in space that flickered and faded as the simulation recalibrated itself. To most of the students, they were just fleeting phenomena, glimpses of something strange, an oddity that didn't make sense. But to Aurora, they were the key. The anomalies were the weak points in the simulation, the areas where the system was trying to hide something. "There," she whispered, pointing to one of the anomalies that seemed to pulse with an irregular rhythm. "We need to go there." Without waiting for the others to catch up, she began to move toward the anomaly. It wasn't a decision made on impulse, but rather one based on careful observation and deduction. She could feel the eyes of the other students on her, their skepticism radiating like a physical presence. But Aurora had long learned not to care about what others thought. Her success was not determined by their approval. It was determined by her ability to outthink and outmaneuver whatever challenges came her way. As she moved toward the anomaly, she felt the pull of the gravitational force around her. It was subtle, but it was there, an invisible thread that tugged her forward. The other students, unsure of what to make of it, began to follow. The thorax, still hesitant, remained a few steps behind, its multiple eyes scanning the surroundings, uncertain whether it should trust Aurera's instincts. With every step, the anomaly grew closer, and Aurera's confidence grew. The faint flicker in the distance became sharper, more defined. She could feel the simulation reacting to her actions, responding to her decisions. It wasn't just a test of intellect, it was a test of willpower, of resilience, and of creativity. In this moment, it was clear that Aurera's strength lay not in the power of her mind alone, but in her ability to connect with the deeper currents of the universe, to see the threads that tied everything together. Finally, they'd reached the anomaly. It wasn't a physical object. It wasn't a place. It was a force, a field of energy that seemed to vibrate with potential, with untapped possibilities. The moment they touched it, the simulation shifted once again. The void around them seemed to expand and contract in rhythm, like a breathing organism. The stars above began to rearrange themselves, forming new constellations, and the nebulae flickered with bright flashes of light. "We're here," Aurera said, her voice steady as she felt the energy of the place. "This is where we need to be." But as the energy of the simulation intensified, so too did the pressure. The challenge was only beginning, and Aurera knew that she had to lead them through it. The road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but if they could work together, if they could unlock the secrets of this simulation, there was no limit to what they could achieve. The core of the challenge. The simulation around Aurera and the students was now fully alive, pulsating with energy and shifting under their feet like a living entity. As they stood at the heart of the anomaly, the vastness of the environment seemed to close in on them, its infinite expanse shrinking and folding into itself. The stars blinked like distant eyes, watching, waiting for the next move. The nebulae, once swirling in their slow dance, now twisted violently, their colors brightening and dimming as though they were alive, reacting to their presence. The very air, or the simulated air, seemed charged with a raw, crackling power that made Aurera's skin tingle. The students were gathered in a loose circle, some still hesitant, others eager to act. The thorax, still unsure of Aurera's lead, stood at the edge, its many eyes darting from one side to the other. The insectoid's body trembled, not from fear, but from an innate curiosity, a deep-seated desire to solve puzzles that were embedded within its species' very DNA. Its antennae twitched nervously, and its mandibles clicked softly in an almost meditative rhythm. Aurera understood. The thorax didn't trust easily, but once it saw the logic, it would follow through with relentless precision. Aurera's mind, however, was already working on something more. She wasn't just analyzing the simulation. She was studying the very fabric of reality that the simulation had created. Everything, from the cosmic winds that blew in strange patterns to the gravitational anomalies that seemed to warp space and time, had a purpose. Nothing in the universe, no matter how chaotic or erratic it appeared, was without design. Even this simulation, in all its unpredictability, had a purpose, and it was Aurera's task to uncover it. The students stood still for a moment, each of them feeling the intense gravitational pull of the energy field. It wasn't just physical weight that pressed down on them. It was the weight of expectation. Their minds were wired to think in linear ways, constrained by the rules of their species and cultures. But this simulation was different. It didn't follow any known laws. It bent reality to its will, making the impossible seem inevitable. One of the students, a young humanoid with silvery skin and glowing blue eyes, spoke up. "What are we supposed to do now? The course seems so far beyond us. How do we even begin to understand it?" Aurera turned to the young student, her eyes meeting theirs. The silvery-skinned being was from the Andromeda system, an alien race known for their advanced mental capabilities. Yet, despite its intelligence, there was a hesitation in its voice, a recognition of the limits of its understanding. This was exactly what Aurora had expected. Despite the alien's superior intellect, it had been trained within a specific framework, one that did not prepare it for the kind of thinking required in this simulation. "The core isn't something you understand in the way you think you do," Aurora said, her voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. "It's something you experience. The core of this simulation is the essence of everything around us. It's the intersection of all the patterns we've seen: gravitational forces, energy currents, and even time itself. We're not just looking for a place. We're looking for a pattern, a flow of energy that connects everything together." The room grew quiet. The alien students exchanged glances, unsure of how to process her words. But Aurora could sense that some of them were beginning to grasp what she meant. Their thoughts, once scattered and hesitant, began to coalesce into a single, unified purpose. A low hum echoed through the simulation, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the core itself. It was subtle at first, just a faint sensation in the background of their minds. But as the hum grew louder, it became impossible to ignore. It was a sound of power, a reminder that the simulation was not only alive, but actively challenging them. Each student felt it, each one reacting in their own way. The thorax shifted its weight, its body tensing as it scanned the environment for any new developments. The silvery-skinned humanoid closed its eyes, focusing deeply on the vibrations, attempting to perceive the hidden currents within the simulation. "Focus," Aurora said, raising her voice slightly to cut through the rising tension. "The pattern is here. You just need to listen. Feel the hum. Let it guide you." She felt it too, the pulse of the simulation, like a heartbeat that beat in time with her own. The hum wasn't just a noise. It was the key to everything. Aurora's mind began to sync with the pulse, matching its rhythm, aligning her thoughts with the very fabric of the simulation. For a moment, she wasn't just a student in this strange environment. She was part of it, connected to its core, its very essence. Suddenly, the nebulae around them began to shift again, this time in response to their collective awareness. The once violent swirls of gas and energy became smoother, calmer, their movement more deliberate, as though they were acknowledging the presence of the students. The gravitational anomalies ceased their erratic behavior, forming a stable, predictable pattern. The stars above rearranged themselves into a new constellation, one that had never been seen before. Aurora's eyes widened as she saw the new formation. It was a star map, one that traced a path through the universe, through the galaxy, even to distant realms that had never been charted before. It was the map of a new journey, a new frontier. The core was not just an object or a place. It was a gateway, a portal to something far greater than anything they had ever imagined. "The core is a nexus," Aurora murmured, her voice filled with awe. "A connection point between different worlds, different realities. It's not just a challenge. It's an invitation." The students were silent, absorbing the enormity of her words. It was clear now that this simulation was not just a test of their intellectual abilities. It was a test of their willingness to think beyond the boundaries of what they knew, to step into the unknown and embrace the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. As Aurora stood at the center of this revelation, a new wave of realization washed over her. This wasn't just about surviving or solving a problem. It was about creativity, about pushing the limits of imagination. The core of the challenge wasn't about finding a physical location or deciphering a set of rules. It was about seeing the universe in a way that no one had ever seen before. And with that understanding, Aurora knew that she had not only passed the test, she had transcended it. "Let's move forward," Aurora said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "We found the core, but the journey is only beginning. The universe is vast, and this is just the start." With that, the students followed her, stepping into the unknown together. The core was no longer just a symbol of their challenge. It was a symbol of their potential, a potential that could change the galaxy forever. The shifting path. The air inside the simulation was thick with anticipation as Aurora and the students stood at the threshold of something far beyond what any of them had imagined. The core, once a nebulous idea in their minds, now felt tangible, pulsating with the potential of limitless possibilities. But as they took their first steps toward understanding it, the very nature of the simulation began to shift beneath their feet. The stars that had once twinkled so serenely now flickered with a chaotic energy, as though the universe itself was uncertain about what was about to unfold. Aurora felt the change immediately. The rhythm of the simulation, the heartbeat that had guided them thus far, began to slow and falter, like a pulse struggling to maintain its steady beat. The stars above them seemed to warp, pulling into a tight spiral that twisted in on itself. The gravitational forces that had once been predictable were now erratic, and the once stable nebula began to collapse into swirling vortexes of energy. "This isn't just a test," Aurora murmured under her breath, sensing the growing tension in the simulation. "It's a reflection of our own thoughts, our fears, our doubts." The simulation was no longer an objective reality that could be studied from a distance. It had become personal. It was adapting to their perceptions, responding to their deepest instincts and uncertainties. It was no longer just a series of puzzles to solve. It was a mirror, reflecting not only their skills but their weaknesses. Each student now stood in the face of their own inner turmoil, the deep-seated fears and doubts that they had carried with them throughout their lives. The thorax, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward cautiously, its antennae flicking nervously. "What is happening? Why has the environment changed so drastically?" it hissed, its mandibles clicking in confusion. Aurora's eyes were fixed on the swirling vortex of energy that had appeared before them. The simulation wasn't just playing with them. It was trying to break them down, to force them into submission. The very essence of the challenge had shifted. It wasn't about intellect or problem-solving anymore. It was about willpower. It was about confronting their own limitations, their own fears, and emerging from this trial stronger than before. The other students murmured nervously, unsure of how to proceed. The humanoid from Andromeda, whose silver skin now gleamed under the unstable lighting, stepped back, its glowing blue eyes flickering with uncertainty. "We cannot move forward like this," it said softly. "This place, it's turning against us." Aurora took a deep breath, centering herself as she always had. She knew that fear could paralyze, and hesitation could be fatal. The key now was to regain control, to focus not on the shifting chaos around them, but on the deeper patterns that governed this strange, ever-changing environment. "No," she said firmly, turning to face the others. "We cannot give in to fear. This is not the simulation turning against us. It is testing us, pushing us to see how we react when things aren't going as planned. We need to trust ourselves and trust each other." She paused for a moment, scanning the faces of the students around her. Some were still frozen in place, gripped by their own fear. But others, the ones who had been listening, were starting to grasp the gravity of the situation. The thorax, despite its initial hesitation, had calmed. Its eyes, once frantic, were now focused and sharp, scanning the swirling energy around them for any sign of stability. Aurora took a step toward the center of the vortex, her mind working furiously to make sense of the chaotic energy around her. The core was no longer a distant goal. It was now a swirling mass of conflicting energies and intentions, each one pulling in a different direction. But she could feel it. There was a pattern in the chaos, a rhythm buried deep within the disarray. "Focus," Aurora said, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "We need to find the center of the chaos. The only way to overcome this is to see the order within the disorder. We need to let the chaos flow through us, not fight it." Her words were not just a command. They were a reminder to herself as much as to the others. Aurora knew that this was the true test, the one that would determine whether they were truly ready for the challenges the galaxy would throw at them. The universe had a tendency to throw chaos into the most ordered of places to test those who dared to push beyond their comfort zones. And this simulation was no different. The stars above them began to twist, their light growing more intense as the gravitational anomalies intensified. The entire simulation was in flux, each element moving independently, but in a strange harmony. It was as if the entire cosmos was in a state of constant flux, its forces teetering on the edge of collapse and creation. The thorax took a deep breath and stepped forward, its many legs moving with surprising grace despite the instability. "We will follow you," it said in its low, clicking voice. "But you must show us the way. Lead us." Aurora nodded, and for the first time since entering the simulation, she allowed herself to fully open her mind to the chaos around them. She focused on the energy, the currents of power that surged through the simulation, and tried to trace their path. It wasn't a simple task. Each current was unpredictable, and they seemed to break apart and reform with every passing second. But as she focused, the pieces began to fall into place. The core was not a single point, it was a field, a complex web of energy and matter that connected everything in the simulation. It wasn't about finding the right answer. It was about understanding the flow, the movement, the changes. The core was the embodiment of change itself, constantly in motion, constantly evolving. Aurora took another step forward, and this time, the simulation responded. The vortex began to slow, its chaotic energy growing more stable as she tuned her mind to the rhythm of the simulation. The stars above them began to align, slowly forming a new constellation, one that mirrored the movements of their own minds. The nebulae calmed, their swirling colors becoming more vibrant, more defined. The students around her began to follow her lead, their minds now syncing with hers. One by one, they joined the flow, the energy of the simulation becoming less overwhelming and more controllable. They were no longer fighting against the forces of chaos. They were moving with it, using it to their advantage. As the simulation continued to evolve, Aurora realized that the true challenge was not in overcoming the forces around them, but in mastering their own response to those forces. The universe would never be predictable, but it could always be understood, if one was willing to look beyond the surface and see the deeper patterns that governed it. The vortex began to dissipate, and the chaos faded into the background. In its place, a new vision emerged, a clear path forward, glowing with potential. The core was no longer a distant dream. It was within their reach, and together, they would claim it. The unveiling of potential. The swirling vortex of chaos finally began to dissolve, its tumultuous energy fading into calm. The stars in the sky above, which had once danced with frantic uncertainty, now settled into a more ordered arrangement. Their brilliant light began to pulse rhythmically, echoing the heartbeat of the simulation itself. Aurora stood at the forefront, her mind still humming with the intense awareness that had guided her through the storm. The others, now more composed and focused, began to move in tandem with her, stepping toward the newly revealed path. It was as if the entire universe had shifted to allow them passage, a path that was not just physical, but intellectual and spiritual as well. In front of them, the core of the simulation began to take shape, not as a single point, but as an expansive network of energy. It was like a web, stretching out in all directions, filled with glowing strands of power that connected everything. Stars, planets, gravitational anomalies, and even the deep voids between them. It was a network that seemed to encompass all of reality, a cosmic web woven together by forces too vast for any single mind to fully grasp. Yet here they were, standing before it, poised to uncover its secrets. The thorax, who had once hesitated, now moved with purpose, its many eyes focused on the glowing strands of energy that flickered before them. Its antennae twitched, sensing the same thing that Aurora had sensed. This was no ordinary test. This was an opportunity to learn something that could change the very fabric of their understanding of the universe. "The network, it's alive," the thorax whispered, its voice a soft hum that reverberated through the stillness of the simulation. But how do we access it? Aurora took a deep breath, her mind racing as she considered the question. The answer was elusive, but she knew it was there, hidden beneath the surface of her thoughts. She stepped forward, closer to the core, and reached out with her mind. The strands of energy flickered in response, their glow intensifying as if reacting to her presence. She could feel it now, a pulse, a rhythm that was both familiar and alien. It was a language, a way of communication that transcended words, a kind of cosmic dialogue that connected all living things. To access it, Aurora said, her voice steady, we must first understand its language. This is not just a network of power, it's a network of thoughts, of ideas. It's a way for all things to connect, to communicate. This is the heart of the simulation, the very essence of everything we've learned here. It is not a place to conquer, it is a place to communicate with. The other students, now following her lead, stepped forward cautiously. The silvery-skinned humanoid from Andromeda was the first to touch the glowing strands, its fingers tracing the lines of energy with reverence. The thorax followed closely behind, its antennae brushing against the strands, absorbing the subtle pulses that ran through them. For a moment, nothing happened. The students stood still, waiting, their minds synchronized with the rhythm of the network. But then, the strands began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that filled the entire space. It was as though the network was awakening, responding to their collective presence. The stars above them flickered, and the nebulae in the distance shifted, their gaseous tendrils moving in perfect harmony with the flow of energy. The simulation, once chaotic, now seemed to breathe in unison with them, as if recognizing the unity between the students and the forces they had learned to control. The humanoid from Andromeda spoke first, its voice trembling with awe. This is beyond anything we've ever experienced. It's like we're part of something greater, something infinite. Aurora nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Exactly. This is the essence of the simulation. The idea that everything is connected. The energy, the stars, the minds of the beings here, and the very thoughts we share. All of it is part of a single living system. To truly understand it, we need to embrace the fact that we are not separate from this network. We are part of it. The thorax tilted its head, its mandibles clicking thoughtfully. But how do we use this understanding? How do we move forward? Aurora's gaze shifted upward, toward the center of the energy web, where the brightest strands converged. In the center, a glowing orb of light pulsed steadily, its brilliance growing brighter with each passing second. It was the core, the heart of the simulation, but it was more than just a glowing sphere. It was the culmination of everything they had experienced, a living representation of the knowledge they had gained. To reach the core, they would need to bridge the gap between their minds and the network. The path wasn't simply a physical one. It was intellectual, emotional, and philosophical. The simulation had tested them, not just with puzzles and challenges, but with the very essence of existence itself. It had forced them to confront their doubts, their limitations, their fears. And now, it was asking them to transcend those boundaries. Aurora closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She had been prepared for many things in her life, but this, the opportunity to unlock the fundamental truth of existence, was something new. It was not about survival anymore. It was about understanding. We have to let go of the boundaries that separate us from this network, Aurora said quietly, her voice echoing in the stillness. We must become one with it. Only then can we truly move forward. The students exchanged hesitant glances. For many of them, the idea of surrendering control, of merging with the very energy that had once been a chaotic force, was frightening. But Aurora knew that it was the only way. This was not a battle they could win through force or intellect alone. It was a challenge that required them to embrace the unknown, to let go of their preconceived notions, and to trust in the collective power of their minds. Slowly, one by one, the students reached out to the core. Their hands brushed against the strands of energy, their minds reaching deeper into the web. The thorax was the last to make contact, its multiple legs touching the strands with a sense of reverence. As each student touched the core, the energy intensified, swirling around them in a brilliant display of light and power. The space around them seemed to collapse in on itself, the simulation folding into a new form. The stars above them flickered, and the nebulae pulsed in time with the flow of energy. Aurora felt herself being pulled into the core, her mind expanding outward, merging with the vast web of interconnected forces. It was a feeling unlike anything she had ever known, both freeing and overwhelming. The knowledge of the universe seemed to rush toward her, overwhelming her senses with the sheer scale of it all. But through the storm of information, she found herself at peace, her mind calm and clear. In that moment, she understood. The core was not just a destination. It was a process. It was the constant evolution of the universe, the ongoing flow of energy and ideas that connected all things. To be a part of it was not just an achievement, it was a state of being. As the energy around them began to settle, Aurora opened her eyes. The simulation was no longer chaotic. It was calm, serene, and full of possibility. The students stood beside her, each of them changed in some profound way. The path ahead was clearer now, and the core, once an elusive goal, was now a part of them. "We've done it," Aurora said softly, her voice filled with awe. "We've unlocked the potential within ourselves. The universe is no longer something to conquer. It is something to understand." The stars above them shimmered brightly, their light reflecting the newfound clarity in their minds. The core was no longer a distant mystery. It was a shared reality, a living connection that tied them to everything around them. And with that understanding, they stepped forward into the next phase of their journey, the test of unity. The calm that followed their connection to the core was not an end, but the beginning of a deeper trial. The energy web, now a tangible force surrounding Aurora and the other students, began to pulse in a way that seemed almost expectant. The stars that had once formed distant constellations now swirled together, intertwining and blending, as though they were alive and responding to their presence. The nebulae, once soft and ethereal, now crackled with a newfound intensity, their gaseous tendrils pulsing with vibrant colors. The very fabric of the simulation was alive with possibility, and Aurora could feel it deep within her bones. But this peace was fleeting. The energy within the web seemed to vibrate with an underlying tension, a force that beckoned them forward into uncharted territory. There was something new in the air now, something unspoken. The path they had just uncovered was no longer clear. It had become fragmented, shifting between different possible realities, each one a mirror of their thoughts, fears, and desires. As the stars shifted overhead, the AI's voice once again reverberated through their minds, crisp and clear, cutting through the ambient hum of the simulation. "Students," it said, "you have reached the center of the network. But know this, to proceed, you must prove your unity. The core has not only tested your intellect and creativity, it has tested your strength to work together as one. This is the final trial." Aurora's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected as much. This entire experience had led them here, to this critical moment where their individual talents, strengths, and minds would need to come together in a way that had never been required of them before. Each of them had overcome personal challenges, faced fears, and learned to see the universe through new eyes. But unity was something far more complex. It was one thing to survive in the face of adversity. It was another to collaborate in the midst of that very adversity, to merge individual power into a collective force. "Unity," Aurora murmured, her voice steady despite the rising pressure she felt within the simulation. She turned toward the other students, her gaze locking with theirs. The Andromedan humanoid, still standing at her side, seemed to reflect the same understanding. The thorax, though not one for overt emotional displays, looked more resolute than ever, its many eyes locked onto the heart of the simulation. But not all of them were as calm. There were whispers, soft and uncertain, among the others. Some of the students had clearly struggled with the collaborative nature of the task. They had relied on their own intellect and abilities for so long, each one an island of knowledge in their own right. And now, they were being asked to give that up, to surrender control, to relinquish the very thing that had driven their success up to this point. Aurora stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and calm in the tense air. This is not just about us as individuals. It's about what we can accomplish together. The core is showing us the very essence of the universe, a web of interconnectedness. To proceed, we must embrace that connection, not just with the energy around us, but with each other. The students fell silent, and for a moment, Aurora wondered if she was asking too much. But as she gazed at them, she saw the flickers of realization, the glimmer of understanding that they were no longer just isolated minds fighting for their own survival. They had become something greater than themselves. This was the true power of humanity's gift, the ability to come together in moments of crisis, to blend strengths, overcome weaknesses, and rise as one. Without speaking further, Aurora extended her hand toward the center of the energy web. She could feel the pull, a magnetic force drawing her closer to the core. But she knew that this wasn't just about her. The path would not open unless every student participated, unless they all connected in perfect harmony. One by one, the students stepped forward, their hands reaching toward the glowing strands of energy. The moment their fingertips made contact with the web, the simulation shifted. It was as though the very reality around them was stretching, bending in response to their collective will. The energy of the simulation intensified, swirling around them like a whirlwind. The stars began to converge, their light fusing into a single, blinding source of power. The nebula that had once seemed like distant clouds of gas now pulsed with life, their colors deepening into hues Aurora had never seen before. It was as though the entire universe was holding its breath, waiting for them to complete the final act of unity. The students, connected by the strands of energy, could now feel the thoughts of the others merging with their own. It wasn't just a shared consciousness. It was a true blending of minds, a fusion of perspectives, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Aurora could feel the Thorax's determination, the Andromedan's deep curiosity, and the other's quiet resolve. It was overwhelming at first, the flood of emotions and thoughts crashing over her. But as they all pushed forward, the energy began to smooth itself out, aligning with their collective vision. The stars above them seemed to slow, their movement becoming synchronized with the rhythm of their shared heartbeat. The core, once distant and abstract, now pulsed in front of them like a living, breathing entity. The energy of the simulation had shifted again, no longer chaotic or fragmented, but aligned and whole. The path they had been walking on was no longer a fractured maze. It had become a straight line, guiding them to the very heart of the universe's mysteries. As they approached the core, the energy around them seemed to expand, enveloping them in a wave of light and sound. It was not a destructive force, but a rejuvenating one. Each student felt it, each one connected to the others, feeling their minds intertwine in a way they had never imagined. The hum of the universe, the pulse of reality itself, vibrated through them. The moment they reached the core, everything stopped. The stars, the nebulae, the swirling energies, everything stilled, as if in reverence. The core, now in front of them, was no longer an abstract concept or an intangible goal. It was the culmination of everything they had experienced. Their struggles, their growth, their unity. It was a symbol of what they had achieved and what lay ahead. Aurora, standing at the center of the simulation, realized that the test was not about knowledge or skill. It was about trust, the ability to rely on others, to let go of individualism and embrace collective strength. This was the true lesson of the core. And as she stood there, connected to the others, Aurora knew that the universe was not a vast, impersonal place. It was a web, a network, a shared experience of infinite possibilities. And together, they had unlocked its true potential.